Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Partners in Wine portion of the Killer Point of View podcast. I'm Ashley.
And I'm Trinity.
And today, we're doing something a little bit different because Trinity is the one with all the information today. And so she's going to break down a very interesting disappearance for us. So I will let you take it away.
So I want to start with an excerpt from a poem by Wilfred Gibson. And this is about the Flannan Isles. It's just a small part. We seemed to stand for an endless while, though still no word was said, 3 men alive on Flannan Isle who thought on 3 men dead. End excerpt. So, the story we will be covering today is the disappearances of the 3 lighthouse keepers on Flannan Isle. Just for a little bit of backstory and a little bit of prehistory. The Flannan Isles are also known as the Hunter Isles, are a group of several islands off the coast of Scotland. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty common for shepherds to take their sheep to these islands because it was believed that if you let your animals graze, specifically sheep, that the grass or whatever had a special magical property to it, and it was said that any sheep that dined on it would bear twin sheep or would be healed from its mysterious illnesses.
Oh, that's interesting. I'd like to see some statistics on that, firsthand accounts of kind of what happened,
Yeah, I'm all about sheep magic, though. I think that's cool.
That is cool.
These islands, obviously, because they're off of the coast of Scotland, and this story takes place in hold on, I'm sorry, I had the date right here.
That's okay.
This story takes place in December of 1900.
Really taking it back here.
Yeah, very, very much so. And obviously back in those times, and I mean even a little bit today, but not nearly as much as back then, people were extremely superstitious. Mm-hmm. And shepherds who would take their sheep to these islands actually wouldn't stay after dark because they believed that there were spirits, or there's quite a few accounts of little people, like fae.
Yes.
Looking into this, I found on one of the islands there's actually a stone construction that predates Stonehenge.
Oh wow!
On one of these isles, yeah. And there's stories about fae people, or little people as they call them. I don't know if that's the right term or not, but yeah, one of these stone structures on one of the islands predates Stonehenge by quite a bit. I can't remember the exact number, but it was quite a bit of time. And there actually, in the one that I'm talking about specifically, there actually seems to be a chamber underneath it that was used. Oh, wow. Yeah, that was used for whatever, right. Probably sacrifices or stuff like that. Because these islands, cool little fun fact, these islands you can actually see and observe astronomy really well. And that's what they believe that maybe this specific stone area was for, was watching for the stars aligning and stuff.
That's really cool. That's something I'm definitely going to look more into when we're done, because it sounds really fascinating.
It is really cool. So, obviously, with all these shepherds and stuff going back to these islands have a very notorious and dangerous set of waters. It's constantly foggy and just pretty violent waters. So in 1886, I believe, they decided to build a lighthouse on one of the larger islands. And I want to go off and state, these aren't normal islands. These aren't like you'd imagine, just large and pretty flat throughout. No, these are basically just very, very large rocks.
Right.
So the specific island that they actually decided to build the lighthouse on, they couldn't even get onto the island. They had to carve out stairs in the side of it.
That's what I was going to say. I would be interested to see how they kind of went about constructing that.
Yeah, I want to know how they got on it in the first place.
Right.
Because, and some of the pictures are actually really interesting, seeing how they built and like carved the stairs into the side of it in order to get this thing built. And it actually took quite a while to get it built.
I would imagine.
Because, and some of the sources I was looking at attributed it to like mischievous spirits not wanting them to build on the island, because like I said, shepherds wouldn't even stay on the islands after dark,
right?
Because they believed in like, I'm just going to leave those spirits alone. I'm not going to mess with that.
That would be me if somebody was like, go build this lighthouse, and I was like out there trying to build the lighthouse and some weird stuff was going on. I'd be like, I don't think this is a good idea, guys.
Yeah, exactly. So. And it was known like specifically around this one island that like just random really bad storms would happen. And we're actually going to come back to that a little bit later. Okay. So hold on to that. So the construction took about 3 years. It was started in 1896 and was completed in 1899. So it was completed in 1899. And our story takes place in December of 1900. So this lighthouse isn't even that old.
No, not at all.
It is relatively new. So, and the way that the Lighthouse Authority over in Scotland acts and how they, like, control their lighthouses is you always have 3 men. And you can never have all 3 men outside of the lighthouse at once. Okay. So, hold on to that for later as well.
Yeah, I'll have to remember that.
So, we are going to start off with our lighthouse keepers. We have James Ducat, which I'm going to apologize in advance if I don't say these names right. So, we have James Ducat, which was the PL, or the PK, I believe, which is the principal keeper. And he was the one that had the most experience.
Okay.
And then we have Thomas Marshall, which is the second assistant lighthouse keeper. And then Donald McArthur, which is an occasional keeper. He was actually filling in for William Ross, first assistant. And it's in listening to what happened to him, it was actually kind of interesting because it's like, man, this is just bad juju luck, you know? So from what I understand, William Ross was a very large and strong, brawny man. He was one of those men of like few words, but very large and strong, kind of like oh my gosh, I can't even remember their name. We have a Paul Bunyan, that type of guy.
Yes, okay.
So, and he was on a cart moving stuff around the island because they had like spots where they had like a lifeboat. They had like a lifeboat area, and then they had a spot where the ships would come in, where they would set up their flags and all that. And on his way back to the lighthouse, the brakes on his cart failed somehow, and it sent him flying out of the cart and like left him pretty seriously injured.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that's just odd to me.
It's too coincidental.
It is extremely coincidental.
Yeah.
So William Ross was relieved by Donald McArthur. So William Ross was definitely, I suppose, one of the lucky ones in this, I guess, unfortunately.
He escaped probably a death there.
Yeah. So, also, a little cool side note is this inspired 2 movies. It inspired The Vanishing, a 2018 film, and The Lighthouse, a 2019 film.
Have you seen either one?
I have not.
I did see, I haven't seen either movie, but I did see that they had made a movie called The Vanishing, and that it was kind of based on this, and I was like, dang, should have watched it, because it sounds interesting, but I just didn't have time.
And it's actually quite interesting because like there's some big actors in those movies too, like Gerard Butler is in one of them.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Robert Pattinson's in the other one.
Oh, I like him.
Yeah. And from what I understand, the one with Robert Pattinson is actually more of a horror.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I definitely want to watch both of those now. Gonna add those to my list.
Yeah. It was pretty interesting. All right. So, and I should say that these aren't inexperienced lighthouse keepers either. specifically James Ducat, I believe he had close to like 25, 30 years of experience as a lighthouse keeper.
So he's basically a professional lighthouse keeper. Like, this is, what he spent years and years of his life doing.
Exactly. He's extremely knowledgeable and experienced. So we are going to start off on December 26th. My bad. December 15th.
Okay.
So on December 15th of 1900, a vessel called the Hesperus, again, I apologize if I said that wrong, a vessel called the Hesperus was coming up to the island as they were trying to continue on to get to the main port. And they were coming in probably about the middle of the night. And mind you, like, these waters are extremely treacherous. They have fog and just very violent waters. And as they're approaching, they don't see a light from the lighthouse or anything.
But they know that the lighthouse is there.
They know that the lighthouse should be there.
Right.
And the crew of the Hesperus and the captain of the Hesperus are extremely knowledgeable, and they take this trip quite often.
Okay.
Because sometimes they would dock, if it was bad enough, they would dock off at the island, at the Flannan Islands. So, as they were approaching the Flannan Islands, and they didn't see anything, they just decided to continue on and hope for the best.
Right.
Because they... from what I understand, the ship had actually gone through some, like, damage before this, so they were just trying to get to their main port. And by the time they got to their main port and actually, like, communicated this to the lighthouse board, it wasn't until December 26th that they...
So, 11 days later?
11 days later is when the Hesperus's captain actually, communicated to the lighthouse board that something had happened.
Wow.
Yeah. So a full 11 days of no lighthouse, no light, nothing.
I can only imagine. Like, shout out to all those people who move goods around with those boats and stuff. And I mean, I've seen the show. I can't even remember what it's called, with the lobsters or the crabs.
Deadliest Catch.
Yeah,
I love that show.
I can't imagine being out on the water like that, because it makes me sick just watching the show. But
it's nerve-wracking to think about.
Yeah, but those people, I mean, it takes a lot of guts to go out there and know what you're up against and keep doing it.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, you're good.
So, it was actually Captain Harvey was the captain of the Hesperus.
Okay.
And he reported on the afternoon of December 26th, no sign of life. So, afterwards, after they had gotten, like, their ship repaired and everything, they went back to the island to try to see what was going on, like, why they couldn't see the light or anything. And another reason why the Hesperus was extremely knowledgeable of this area was because they were actually, like, a lighthouse relief boat.
Okay.
Like, they would bring in other lighthouse keepers, they would bring in, like, supplies and all that, because the lighthouse keepers would do rotations of 6 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And it was a very, like, lonely and demanding job, even though there was the three of them. And that was something that people talked a lot about in their theories, was that when you're alone with three people for 6 weeks, however long, especially because of William Ross having to get traded out,
Right.
So you never really think about what that can do to people. And it wasn't uncommon for fights to break out, for there to be, like, mild violence, a little bit of, like, pettiness. And a lot of the times the lighthouse keepers would just try, like, everything to keep relatively calm. Like, they would even try to play, like, little pranks on each other, which most of the time wouldn't really work. It would just make everything worse.
Right.
So, and it's not like that there was much to do, because you always had to have at least one person at the lighthouse at all times. So they would just pass their time with, like, playing cards, like, going outside and, like, kicking a ball around, whatever they could do. But especially on the Flannan Islands, like, the winds were so bad that they really couldn't do that.
You're on an island. You said, they have pretty bad storms in this area, so it's not there's really not much for you to do at all.
No, and also this really isn't an island. It's just a really, really large rock with some grass.
Little patch out there for them.
Pretty much, just for the sheep and their magic.
Yeah.
So, on December 26th, I'm trying to get back to where I was. Sorry. So, they sounded the horn, and usually, because you could see ships coming from quite a distance,
right.
So what they would do, like the lighthouse keepers, one or two of them would go to where they were going to dock, and they would put out a flag. It's like, hey, we see you, you can come in to dock, it's going to be safe. Mm-hmm. They never saw a flag. There was nothing. So after a little bit of no flag, they were like, well, maybe they just didn't see us, so they sounded the horn a couple of times. They even went as far as firing basically a flare. Mm-hmm. To try to get their attention. And when nobody responded, Captain Harvey sent up the relieving keeper, Joseph Moore, which he actually had experience at this lighthouse beforehand.
Okay.
I think he was one of the first lighthouse keepers to stay here at this lighthouse after it was built. Mm-hmm. And something interesting, and it's actually in the rest of the poem that I read earlier, was that when Joseph Moore approached the lighthouse, he made it such a big deal that it's actually in the actual records of what happened. When he approached the lighthouse, he said that he saw 3 very large black birds roosted atop of the lighthouse. Mm-hmm. And he swears to pretty much his deathbed that was the 3 lighthouse keepers.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And apparently those birds stayed around pretty much the entire time. So.
And that's, obviously anybody who's ever seen a bird before knows that they'll take off the second you get anywhere near them. So
exactly.
That right there.
That's a little spooky.
That's a little spooky.
Joseph Moore, pretty much for the rest of his life, stayed to the fact that those were the 3 lighthouse keepers, and that they must have upset some kind of spirit, or that they weren't respecting the sanctity of the island. Mm-hmm. Hence them being turned into large black birds.
Right.
So, Joseph Moore went up to the lighthouse and found all 3 of the main doors closed, because I guess that they had some sort of airlock or a mudroom type of deal. Mm-hmm. To where you could get into the main lighthouse, and then up to where the large candle was.
Right.
Or a large oil lamp. And it's noted that the lighthouse was clean, the kitchen area was clean, and the beds were made. Which is actually an interesting little fact, because a lot of sources will say that, there was food left out, and the beds were unkempt, like somebody had just disappeared, and mm-hmm. It's like, no, that's not
what happened.
True. Nope. The lighthouse was in pretty much pristine condition, and the oil lamp was actually set up to be lit that night whenever it is that they disappeared.
Right.
So they decided that when the lighthouse keepers disappeared must have been sometime in the afternoon, mm-hmm. because you had one set of lighthouse keepers that would take care of one set, which is 1 or 2 of the lighthouse keepers, would stay up at night, and they would prep the lamp, light the lamp, and then they would sit and make sure and watch nothing happened.
Right.
And then they would be relieved by the morning crew, who would come in. One guy would make breakfast and prepare stuff for the day, and then the other one would go upstairs, extinguish the lamp, clean it, and get it prepared for the next night. Mm-hmm. So, at the state of the way things were, they had to have disappeared after all of that was done. So they had to have disappeared sometime in the day.
Yeah.
So, and logs were very important. So, the primary lighthouse keeper, which was James Ducat, was in charge of doing the logs. Mm-hmm. So it would basically, if you saw something weird, a storm came in, something happened, you had to log it. You logged everything, even the barometric pressure you'd log.
Right.
So, and this is where it gets a little strange. Thomas Marshall, I do believe, was... the one making entrances into the log, which he wasn't supposed to be. He had made logs for December 13th, 14th, and 15th. And this is where the logs start to get a little bit weird, because it mentions on the 13th a really violent storm, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the names.
No, you're good.
He mentions that Donald McArthur was crying or weeping, and James was angry. And then on the 14th, there's another entry about the continuation of a really horrible storm and that it's not ending. And then it also goes to mention that all three of the men were praying at this point. And from what I had read and understood, none of these men were praying men.
Religious.
Exactly. And then on the 15th was the last entrance, and it said that the storm was over, and they seemed to be relieved. And that was the last entrance, was on December 15th. And then 2 days later, I believe, it was midnight of the 15th when the Hesperus came by.
So in between that time.
Something
clearly happened.
Yes. Something clearly happened to where the storm was over, which is interesting because a lot of theories say that the men were swept away during the storm when they were trying to go and secure the lifeboat, because the lifeboat was gone. But it wasn't gone as in like somebody took it and left. It was gone as in it was ripped away from where it was supposed to be, because they found pieces of its cloth.
Right.
From like its, I guess it had like a small sail on it.
Okay.
And pieces of that cloth were still attached. And the ropes that secured it were also still just sitting there. Like it had just been ripped away.
Right.
So, but a lot of the theories about this case is that they were swept away in the storm. They had been blown away from a westerly wind, which isn't true, because that island, or was it, I think it was easterly, my bad. The island had a really big, it was really notorious for having violent eastern winds. And on the 15th, there wasn't any easterly winds.
See, that's so weird. That's so weird. Another thing that I think is odd, too, so the guy who was making all the notes in the log, he was, one of the lesser experienced ones, and that was, not his designated job. He was not supposed to be doing that, right?
Exactly, yes. That was not, and something about the lighthouse keepers throughout in the Lighthouse Authority was that they had very, very specific rules. Even to the point where if they lost certain pieces of equipment in a storm, they would be charged 5 shillings, or they'd had 5 shillings taken out of their pay, which back in that time is a lot of money.
Right.
So it was really important. And that's a theory that some people have, is that 2 of the men, or 1 of the men, went out to try and secure this box and got swept away, because this island is known to have 110-foot waves.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Which is odd, because the lighthouse, I believe, sits 200 and something feet up. Right. So even if it was having 110-foot waves, even though the lighthouse is on the tallest point, I still don't think that the 110-foot waves would knock them away from where the supplies were, because I believe that was even higher than 150 feet.
Right.
From the water. So.
Yeah. That's still just... That really sticks out to me, that he was the one making the notes when, he knew he wasn't supposed to be doing it. It makes me almost think that, maybe something was so wrong with the one who was supposed to be doing it that he had kind of taken over the job or something like that.
Exactly. And the exact entry from 15th, which is supposed to also have barometric meter readings. It's supposed to have it's supposed to have a bunch of just data, and it didn't have anything. The only thing that the December 15th entry had was storm ended, sea calm, God is all over.
Yeah, I mean, that storm clearly had them stressed out to, be neglecting to put that information in and then, you know, kind of taking over someone else's job. So the storm had to have been bad.
Yeah. And something that'll give you a little bit of a chill. Locals throughout the 12th to the 15th, there was no storm.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to tell me that, you know, nobody else in the area reported storms or anything. Like, that is so crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Just insane. And that would scare the shit out of me. Like, if I was at this lighthouse and I, like, went through these horrible storms for days at a time, and then I did leave, and, like, I went, you know, over here to neighbor island, and they were like, what are you talking about? It wasn't storming. I would have been like, what? I'm not going back there.
Exactly. And a little thing to mention was that on a neighboring island about 26, I think it was 26 nautical miles away, the commissioners of the Lighthouse Board had appointed a man named Roderick Mackenzie, which he was a gamekeeper near, I have no idea how to pronounce that, I'm so sorry, Miavrig, which was a neighboring island, to watch out for signals and lights from the lighthouse. And by signals, so the lighthouse, the lighthouses had their own ways of doing distress signals,
right?
Which was basically a really large pole that had, like, discs. And if there was a problem, they would one of the discs, and then Roderick could send in a telegram, or he could wire in and say, hey, there's a problem on this island. You need to come out here and check it out. So the Lighthouse Authority actually questioned him and was like, hey, why didn't you report anything? Did you not see anything? And apparently he wasn't on the island at the time. He was not home.
Convenient.
Yeah. He was not home, but his two sons were. His two sons, which were 17 and 18, were home and had been told to watch for signs, watch for it being lit. And apparently the lighthouse hadn't been lit from the 15th to the 25th, which makes sense because when the Hespers came back, Joseph Moore on the 26th stayed with three other people and lit the lighthouse because you have to have the lighthouse lit.
Right.
Because I don't think I mentioned this in the beginning, but this area has had literally thousands upon thousands of crashes.
And that right there is not helping these the spirit problem that they allegedly have is having all of these shipwrecks and deaths and stuff. So
exactly. So, let's see. I have specific dates here for the gamekeeper and his sons talking about seeing the light. So, with the and he could even see it with the because he was quite a distance away, and like I said, that this island has always had like really bad fog. He did, however, have like a really good telescope to try to see the light. And the light was seen on December 7th, was not seen on the 8th, 9th, 10th, or 11th. And it was seen again on the 12th, but not again until the 26th.
Okay, so now I want to know what happened on like that first little spot, because that's a lot of days to go.
It is.
And not see it. It'd be one thing if it was like you didn't see it one night because maybe it was like super foggy or something, but to not see it that many days in a row is definitely suspicious.
And the thing that Roderick had said is that he was kind of used to, especially on really, really foggy nights, even with the telescope, sometimes couldn't see the light, surprisingly enough. But he said he'd never gone more than 2 or 3 days without seeing it. And according to this, that's quite a good amount of time.
That's a lot of days.
I mean, even just on the first bit was the 8th through the 11th, not seeing one light.
That's a lot of days. I'd be interested to see what the logs looked like from those days. Like, was there something else going on? Was everything documented by the right person? Was there all of these other statistics on there that, you know, they were supposed to be writing down? Or was it a similar thing where it was just kind of erratic?
Yeah. And that's kind of the funny thing, because I found the actual Lighthouse Authority, like, .org, and they have like letters and stuff from Joseph Moore and the captain of the Hesperus, but they don't, from what I understand, the logbook actually went missing shortly after this.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah. Because, going back to the poem that I read at the beginning of this, the guy that wrote the poem said that he actually had the original logbook. And in the poem is where we hear the beds were a mess and there was a dinner set to be ready and a chair flipped over, blah, 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 stuff like that. But according to the actual lighthouseauthority.org, none of that happened, according to Joseph Moore. So, obviously, we know that the writer of that poem didn't actually have the logbook.
Yeah.
Or maybe he did. But from what we were told, the logbook kind of just went, or was just kind of, maybe they started a new one. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, shortly after they discovered that the island had been, like, abandoned or was empty, they decided to leave Joseph Moore on the island with 3 others, a Mr. MacDonald, a buoy master, and 2 seamen that had been volunteered to stay with Moore to help keep the lighthouse in working order.
They had volunteered, or somebody else had volunteered them?
They had been volunteered. Ugh. The 3, even Joseph Moore, like, I have an excerpt from the captain of the Hesperus, and a part of it says that, where is it? Joseph Moore was extremely upset and unwilling to stay. And another thing that I should mention, Joseph Moore was extremely close to James Ducat and Thomas Marshall. And he wasn't really super aware of Donald McArthur because Donald McArthur was relatively new. I think he'd only been doing lighthouse keeping for 4 or 5 years. So he was still learning.
Right.
But Joseph Moore, like, was extremely close to these men that had disappeared. And Joseph Moore, like, basically begged and pleaded not to be left on the island because he didn't want to stay.
I wouldn't want to either.
No, he was honestly he was pretty terrified from the way that it's written.
Which I know not everybody, believes in the spirits and ghosts or whatever you want to call it, but I think that if you are somebody that believes in that, you can feel that negativity. You can feel the terror that was left there. And, maybe that's the case with him, that you just get these horrible feelings that I would not want to be left there either.
No. Absolutely not. So, and now I have a couple of theories. For you. I don't know, because, like, the commissioner, not the commissioner, the Roderick fellow not being at the island, I don't know why, but that just kind of strikes me as mildly weird. I don't know why. I mean, like, people have their own lives and everything, but him not being there during the time that all of this went down and not being able to see the light and not reporting it, because he's supposed to report if anything weird's happening. And after this incident, the Lighthouse Authority actually set in a new rule for all of their their watchers, that if they didn't see the lighthouse light on, they had to report it.
Yeah, which is a logical rule.
Exactly. So there's a couple of theories about what happened to these men. Some of them are a little bit more fanciful than others, but the fanciful ones are honestly the fun one.
Yeah.
So obviously we have James Moore. He is and was thoroughly convinced that the 3 got turned into large birds. And, like, something I should mention that I completely forgot was one of the coats that specifically belonged to, I think it was Ducat, was still in the lighthouse.
So, like, this would have been, like, a raincoat that he put on to go outside or something? Or, like...
Yes, okay. And from what I understand, like, it had been his raincoat for literally ever. Like, he wore it basically constantly, from what I understand. And the other 2 were missing, obviously, but his was still there.
Super weird.
It is super weird. So, obviously, our first theory about what happened was that they got swept away. Mm-hmm. They got swept away trying to secure something, or they maybe tried to take the lifeboat and couldn't leave. But something that just strikes me weird is this lighthouse wasn't even 2 years old.
Right.
And it was extremely sturdy, and it was like 200 feet above the waves. So I don't know why they just wouldn't stay.
Yeah, these are men who, they're out on these lighthouses all the time. They know what the water is like. They're not gonna just, unless they were in some state of like hysteria where they were like, we have to get off this island right now. They know that going out on that little boat in the middle of a storm is death. Like, they wouldn't have just went down there and been like, yeah, let's go.
But the odd thing is, the logs say December 15th, storm is over.
Yeah. So that wouldn't have happened.
They disappeared within 12 hours of that last log being made, probably around there. Because the 15th is when the Hesperus came by.
Right.
And there was no light. So maybe if the Hesperus had tried to stop on the 15th,
they would have found something. They would have seen something.
Maybe.
Is that like this, they were swept away? Is that like the narrative that like the official people want to push? So that it's like, oh, it was just an accident. It happens out here, dangerous waters. That's kind of what I figured. I think, I know some people don't even want to explore other options, but they also kind of want it to be like, this is just something that comes with the job, and it can happen. It's not a big deal, and just kind of sweep it under the rug and move along type of thing.
And obviously being a lighthouse keeper back then was an extremely dangerous job when it came to these violent storms and everything, but the log said, storm gone, everything is clear. And then the lighthouse wasn't lit that night.
Yeah, I don't think I believe that quite. So
just looking into it, I don't believe it at all. And that's kind of the sucky thing about this case that I didn't realize until it was kind of too late. Was there's the information that I have given you is pretty much the only information that you can find. Yeah, it's a very like closed case type deal. It's like, they were swept away. It happens. It's like.
And I mean, with how long ago it was, with, the documentation process back then, with, things maybe being lost or, stories being told differently over the years, it's really hard to know what's what.
Yeah, exactly. And especially with apparently the logbook going missing or something happened to it.
Yeah, that seems pretty convenient to me.
It does. And some of the sources I saw that, Joseph Moore had it because it was the last remnants of his dear friends, or it had just been like they had just filled it up the rest of the way and gotten rid of it, or something along those lines.
Right.
But if a poet was saying that, I had the long lost logs from the island, blah, 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 it's like, you're probably happy to.
You probably didn't.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
No. So that's one of the theories.
Okay.
Another one of the theories is what you were talking about earlier, is that Thomas Marshall, he had killed the other two and continued to fill in the log. So that's actually a really popular one because of the, it's not uncommon for lighthouse keepers to go mad, especially with the sense of isolation. Yeah, you have two other people with you, but it is extremely lonely. You're away from your family. It is an extreme, and that's how I've seen it in a lot of the sources, is it's a very emotionally and mentally and physically demanding job.
I can absolutely see that. I mean, just the isolation alone, you're on this island, and like you said, there's two other people, but you're in the middle of an ocean on an island, and you're there for weeks at a time, and I feel like at one point the days kind of just probably blur together, and it's just, I don't know that, that's the theory that I would hang my hat on, but I feel like it's definitely plausible. It's obviously plausible too that they were actually swept away. I'm not going to dismiss that, but it just seems so weird that the man that was supposed to be writing in this log, I don't think he would have just been like, here, kid, take the pen and the book and you write everything now. Just because, you said they're so experienced, they're so meticulous about what they do. It doesn't seem like he just kind of shoved that job off on somebody else.
And especially because of, like you said, the meticulousness, they could get in trouble for something like that because it's very much like this person is authorized to do paperwork, you're not.
Exactly.
And he wasn't even the first assistant. He was a second assistant. William Ross was the first assistant.
Right. So you're like the last guy that should be touching the book.
Pretty much.
And it's just so odd. But again, I keep going back to like that first point in time where the neighbor reported not seeing the light and stuff at night. And I mean, obviously we can't because the book is gone. And I just would really like to see what the logs looked like at that point.
Exactly.
See if there was something else going on.
And something that I would like to think is kind of odd is, so these are the rest of the logbook entries. So December 12th, Keeper Thomas Marshall wrote, "Severe winds, the likes of which I have never seen before in 20 years. He then added, Principal Keeper James Ducat has been very quiet, and William McArthur, known as the experienced mariner and tough brawler, had been crying." December 13th. Long entries had noted that the storm was still raging and the three men had been praying. And this is, somebody makes a note of it. It's very weird why the lighthouse keepers would be fearful of a relatively safe, newly built lighthouse.
Yeah.
That took 3 years to build.
Yeah. Like, these storms are probably not new for them. Like, you could be nervous at one point, but to be crying and praying and, like, be in this state, like, that's saying something.
It's very odd.
And then to find out, everybody else is like, what storm?
Exactly. Especially...
That's what creeps me out.
Yeah. And something that's really weird is the gamekeeper and his two sons that had been watching the island apparently couldn't even see the island with their extremely powerful telescope, which apparently this Roderick had been doing it for, since the lighthouse had started. And it's like, I don't know, it's just really weird. It's almost like a bubble of a storm around this one singular island and nowhere else. It's just really odd.
It is really odd.
I really like the theory that Thomas Marshall just went crazy. Like, he had some kind of, like, seasickness or... Because it was common, even with, like, mariners and fishermen, stuff like that, just going mad out at sea and hallucinating. It's pretty common.
I can totally see that. I'm not very well versed on any of that, but I could see that being a total possibility. Just snapped and lost it and, But then, like... Did he just toss their bodies outside? And, like, where did he go? Like, that's kind of my hang up at that point. I mean, because I'm trying to picture this island in my mind, and I feel like it's not an accurate representation. Like, I feel like he couldn't just walk outside and toss them over.
No, he would have had to drag them quite a ways if he had killed them. Unless he had just, like, pushed them.
Yeah.
But then again, you're not supposed to have... You're always supposed to have one person at all times. So,
yeah, and then where did he go after that? Did he kill himself? Did he, like,
that's what a lot of people think.
Jump off the cliff? Or, I mean, it's totally plausible.
But I don't know. I'm kind of going for the fact that they got turned into birds.
And I absolutely will not dismiss that. Like, I know some people will be so quick to be like, that's dumb. They're obviously on this dangerous island. They obviously got swept away. That's it. End of story. But I really like to, think about all the possibilities, even if, a lot of people don't think they're plausible. So,
and especially because Joseph Moore made it such a big deal.
Yeah. Like, that had to have been something that either, like, scared him or really stuck out to him to even mention that. Like, it's a bird. Because if you walk outside right now, you're not going to take notice of a couple birds hopping around in the yard, and to really notice something like that, it had to have really stuck with him.
Like, if my 3 friends went missing around here and I saw 3 seagulls, I'm like, oh my God, it's the seagulls. Like, no.
Seagulls. No, that's not going to be your first instinct.
But on an island that has magical sheep healing properties and is known to have, like odd structures and like spirits and like witch spirits and like little fae people. It's like I'm not dissing that at all.
No,
that is definitely an option for me.
Yeah, me too. And like I said, there's always people who will immediately write that stuff off, but that's something that, you know, it's always a possibility.
Mm-hmm. And then it's actually kind of funny, but one of the really, really big theories is that all three, like a surprisingly big theory, was that all three men lost. So in like Scottish Celtic mythology, they have a male equivalent of sirens.
Okay.
I can't remember their exact name, but basically, and the only way to escape them with like your lives is winning a game of rhymes. And you would not believe how many people are like, man, they just lost a game of rhymes to these male sirens and got, you know, it's like...
That's wild. I haven't seen that one, but I mean, you know what? You never know. Mm-hmm. So I'm definitely not gonna write anything off. And, you know, obviously the really sad part here is we'll really never know what happened. I mean, with this being 123 years ago at this point, you know, nobody from that time is around. It's just kind of like
it's all hearsay at this point.
A mystery forever. So
yeah,
that's sad too. Because you know, I think about, you know,
because they all had families.
Yeah,
they all had wives and they all had children. And something weird is that after this, like, you never heard anything more. Like, I don't think Joseph, like, aside from obviously the birds and all that, but Joseph Moore never came out and said anything else. Well, I don't think William Ross ever went back to that island.
I wouldn't. I would not go back there. So, where, like, is the lighthouse still there?
The lighthouse is still there, yes.
There's people that still work it?
I do believe so, yes. However, with technology and how far it's come, lighthouses, I don't know about that specific area, but I know, like, around us, lighthouses aren't a big thing anymore because ships have sonar and they have radar and they'll be able to see something coming miles ahead,
right,
before they even see a lighthouse, especially in a really bad storm. So
yeah, I didn't know, you know, if it was just kind of there and abandoned, or if there was people that still took care of it or still worked it, or what. I'm curious to know if like anything else has happened after this. I would have to go look that up, probably see if there's any other odd occurrences that happened there.
So from what I saw, I couldn't find any other weird occurrences that happened at the Flannan Isle lighthouse. I really couldn't. Like, there wasn't really... And again, like, I was super excited about this case, but as I started to dig into it and everything, I just was like, there's not, unfortunately, a lot of information on it. They just didn't talk about it enough. Like, there wasn't, it just, like I said earlier, it just seemed like really weirdly just cut and closed.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, they just blew off the island.
You know, which works for the people who don't want it to be a big deal, and it's just something that you can write off. But, you know, I mean, for their families and different things, it's still it would be a story to tell and to, you know, find out what happened. People
equate this to the Mary Celeste. Have you ever heard of the Mary Celeste?
I feel like I heard it in a movie.
So the Mary Celeste was a boat or ship, and it had kind of just gone missing and, like, floated off course. And I can't remember the exact time of like, had passed between it leaving its port to getting to port, you know. And it had kind of just disappeared. And a little while later, it was found just perfectly fine, just floating around at sea. And when it was boarded, the entire boat was just empty. There was no people.
That's creepy as fuck.
It is. And it had, I think it was like a boat of like 9 or 10 people. I think it wasn't huge, but it had quite a large crew, especially back then.
Right.
And apparently it was just completely empty. Like, there was no damage to the boat. I don't even think any of the lifeboats were gone. It just looked like it had been just sitting there. And another interesting thing, because people are like, oh, pirates probably just came and got them, you know, and it's like, if they would have gotten them, then because this boat was carrying alcohol.
Yeah, stuff would be missing. Like, it would look like...
I think it was specifically an alcohol boat. Like, it just shipped, like, wine, ale, whatever. Mm-hmm. And none of it had been touched. Yeah. It was all...
Pirates would have been all over that.
Exactly. If it was pirates, they would have freaking sunk it.
Yeah, they wouldn't have just left it chilling there with all that alcohol on it. So that doesn't even sound logical.
And from what I understand, from what I remember from the Mary Celeste, everything was basically... as it should have been. It just looked like one day everybody just disappeared. I don't even think there were logs on the boat, and you're supposed to have logs. Mm-hmm. So people equate this to the lighthouse version of the Mary Celeste, which the Mary Celeste is also really fascinating, but again, it's one of those cases to where there's not a lot of information on it, because with things like this, especially back then, I don't know, stuff just seems a lot fishier back then, you know what I mean?
Yes, 100%.
Because it's just like, they probably just got crazy and jumped overboard, or they got scared in a storm, and it's like there would have been damage to the boat if it was in that bad of a storm for everybody to just jump.
Yeah, and be gone.
Not even take the life preservers.
Yeah, that, like, they always want to say stuff like that, but anybody who's, like, thinking logically, it's like, you're not fooling me, because that doesn't make any sense.
No, it's just, I don't know. It really bums me out that this is going to sound horrible, but it bums me out that it didn't happen, like, later, like, closer to nowadays.
Yeah, because there would be so many other things to kind of get information from.
There would have to be some sort of other documentation. It wouldn't have been able to be, like, covered up as easily. It's just like... I don't know, the Mary Celeste and the Flannan Islands, they just give me weird cover-up vibes.
Oh, absolutely.
So
I'm definitely going to go look more into this Mary Celeste, because that sounds very intriguing. But, yeah, cover-up is kind of where I'm at. Like, you know, something weird definitely happened. So.
Definitely. So, but unfortunately, I know this is kind of a short episode, but that's all the information I have on this one.
Yeah, that's okay. That's very... It's so weird. Like, there's just too many things that are coincidences, and, you know, obviously it sucks to not really have any resolution.
I'm going with Faye. I'm going with They Were the Birds. That's what I'm going with.
That's totally plausible. Like, I'm not even joking. Like, I'm not being ridiculous. I think... I definitely don't think they just floated away, like they said, but something weird happened.
And the weirdest part to me is it was hours in between the last log entry and the Hesperus coming by. Mm-hmm. That's what's the weirdest to me. And that the lighthouse light had been extremely inconsistent for almost a month.
Yeah, that's a long time.
That is a long time.
Especially because that would have had to have been like right after they got there. If they were on like a 6-week rotation, you know, that'd be 2 weeks in. But for the last month of that to... Yeah.
It's just so... Especially because of the relieving lighthouse keeper.
Yeah.
Because of William Ross's injury, which is just so weird that William Ross gets injured by his brakes suspiciously just not working anymore and getting freaking flung into some rocks.
Yeah.
And then getting sent off the island. I don't know. Now that I say that out loud, that just sounds kind of like... That sounds a little weird.
It does.
That's almost like, all right, we like William. We're going to pull him off the island. We're going to put this guy over here that we don't necessarily like. And then, oh no.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's too weird.
It's just so odd. And I don't know how to feel about any of it.
No. Other than the fact that something's definitely not right there. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I don't have anything else.
No, do I?
Okay. So, like, comment, subscribe. Do all that good stuff on YouTube. You can follow the podcast on Instagram. It's the Killer Point of View. And, you know, this will stream audio wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, whatever it is.
I think it's Apple, Spotify.
It's also on Anchor, I believe. So
okay.
There's that. And let's see. So like I said at the beginning, I think this is our second episode. So we have a previous one if anybody wants to go listen to that, and
which is so good.
It was good.
The previous episode was so good.
Yeah, lots of information in there. Mm-hmm. So that was good. So yeah, we'll be back next week, and I think that is it. So just remember that there is a thin line between horror movies and true crime. Good night.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.